You're listening to the Crisis Cop podcast on the Two Guys Talking Podcast Network.
Depending on how old you are, you may not remember 1974. But you know who does? William Kidd, aka Billy the Kid. Why does he remember 1974? Because that's the year the San Francisco Police Department created their first crisis negotiation team. And Bill was there from the beginning. Since that time, Bill has built a legacy that has been undeniable in the field of crisis negotiations. And we're going to hear his story right now. Welcome to the Crisis Cop podcast. Joining us today in the knock is William Kidd, aka Billy the Kid, who started his law enforcement career in 1969 with the San Francisco Police Department. In 1974, he was one of the founding members of the San Francisco Police Department's crisis negotiation team. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. So just a little bit, you're one of the founding members of the San Francisco team. Just a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about your career and how you became a negotiator?
Sure. Well, career pretty much was just sort of a arbitrary lucky chance, I guess. Had no family in law enforcement. I was getting out of college. I was about to go on active duty in the Army. I was thinking about what I was going to do after I got out. And for those who are old enough to recall, the 60s were pretty active socially, and a lot of conflict, a lot of problems like that with rioting and whatnot during the 60s, especially towards the mid to latter part of the 60s. So anyhow, for whatever reason, it seemed to me that it was an attractive type of work to check out. Mm-hmm. And just before I graduated, it was back again. This is really back in the day. So you could apply for a position in at least in a city like San Francisco. You'd be cleared within a couple of months, mm-hmm. and within 4 or 5 months be hired. And that's what happened. I graduated in May 69. I applied, got accepted, and started the academy in September. I was done with that in November, and was assigned a patrol at the end of the year. And then I was off and running. I enjoyed it tremendously, really had a good time. My orders came through. I went on active duty in the Army for about 20 months. Mm-hmm. Got back from Vietnam, reported back for duty, and then I was back to the same, actually the same station, fortunately. And then after that, I worked various places, including the academy, and made sergeant, worked as an FTO before that, worked as an FTO sergeant, and then was transferred to investigations. And I worked in investigations for the rest of my career, which I enjoyed, but it was ambivalent about. By the time I got out, I regretted I had not gone back to patrol. As it turned out, because when I retired from San Francisco, I went to work part-time for Sonoma County Sheriff. I've been recruited by negotiators up there to come work for them, and I did, and I was on their team as well, and got back to exposed to patrol personnel and tasted mm-hmm. that, and realized emotionally, at least, I missed a lot of what that was about. Yeah. But anyway, that was how I was there. And then when I was at SFPD in the 73, 74, the department announced that we had a sergeant who had completed a special project, was told he could get specialized training or whatever he would request. He went to a excuse me, IACP conference mm-hmm. Back in the Midwest, where representatives of the NYPD talked about this new approach they were taking with barricaded subjects and hostage takers. He came back, pitched it to SFPD. They decided they were going to check it out. They brought Harvey Schlossberg and Frank Bowles out to SF and trained all of the lieutenants in the department who were interested in participating. Mm-hmm. And then they surveyed them as to whether they thought the program should be established in San Francisco. They agreed it should. It was. They asked for volunteers, and being relatively dumb, immature, but it sounded interesting. Myself and some friends, we volunteered, and by September 1974, we had a team, which, to my knowledge, as best I've been able to find out, I always ask around with people I haven't met from different parts of the country when their team started. And the best I've been able to find out, ours was the second team after NYPD, which, and we may want to talk about this later, given that the concept wasn't received with open arms in law enforcement, a lot of places weren't interested, didn't understand it, didn't think it was their style, whatever. But anyhow, that's how I got started, and been addicted, fascinated, involved ever since to present time.
So kind of being the very, very first, I mean, you were right there when the groundwork kind of started. What was like some of the training you guys were doing to kind of prepare yourselves for some of these situations?
Well, our first class, the basic they gave us was 24 hours of abnormal psychology from one of the FBI agents at Quantico in their behavioral. I don't know if it's behavioral science yet, but that's basically, we got 24 hours of abnormal psychology, complete with all the photographs of the body parts and refrigerators and all that good stuff. And but it was interesting. The rest of it was pretty much the department, those people who had been involved at that point in organizing the team, how we were going to operate, our procedures, familiarity with that process, and then pretty much, okay, when you're done here, let us know if you want to still be involved. If you don't, that's fine too. And roughly half a class of about 30 some odd, maybe 20 or thereabouts, agreed to continue to be involved, although I think we lost within 4 or 5 years, we lost a number of people, basically because we had a dramatic incident, hostage taking, within a few months. After that, there were a few incidents here and there that weren't quite so dramatic, sometimes handled by patrol personnel, which was fine. That was one of the policies. It's like, we're there to assist patrol if they need it. If they're handling it, that's fine. If they do ask us out, we're gonna assist. We're not gonna step up and say, "Okay, boys, we'll take it from here." We'll be there to provide whatever assistance we can. So it wasn't a real. We didn't have a lot of didn't have many hostage takings, and so, like I say, several fell by the wayside.
So just kind of being there in the 70s, I'm sure you probably had a lot of growing pains and some things you probably just learned on the job. What were some things you kind of picked up on that, you thought might work, but then after really having some of these real world experiences, you realize, man, maybe we need to change the way we do some of these things?
Well, what happened was actually kind of interesting. And a lot of my basic response is to say that a lot of what we were learning was what we learned from other agencies and incidents that they handled. For the most part, that ended up going well. I think that was probably one of the things that worked in our favor is that when an agency would have a hostage event, no prior preparation most of the time, no contemplation. It would go down, command decisions would be made about, okay, you're going to talk to this person. And they did, and they found out, because of the nature, as you know, the nature of negotiations, just being able to have slow things down, have a patient conversation and establish contact with somebody goes a long way to resolving most incidents. So they pretty much were resolved pretty quickly, and more agencies found it, oh, maybe this isn't such a bad idea. Maybe we ought to have a team. But what happened was the sergeant from SF that found out about this, brought it back to San Francisco. He was sold 150%. He was going to be, what ended up happening is he became a big proselytizer of the concept. And together with a department, we established the first state certified basic negotiation course at San Francisco PD. And within a couple of years, they had run 3 or more classes open up to any law enforcement from wherever, really. It was pretty much the surrounding the Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area. And they had like 300 plus cops come through, mostly sergeants, lieutenants, things like that. And so teams started to crop up all over the place. Trying to think of it was sort of the, my approach was, learn from the examples of others. Look what works, what doesn't work. And there wasn't a whole lot that didn't work. Now, initially, it took a couple of years, I guess, before we started taking a close look at how incidents were handled. We had a real bright lieutenant negotiator at a town called San Rafael, which is north of us in Marin County. And several Marin County agencies got interested, and they started running occasional training days where they would talk about an incident they had, or they would bring in, what they did quite a bit was bring in participants in higher profile incidents from wherever around the country, even outside the country, and do training days. So we would go to these meetings and we would find out how things were handled at most places. We found out that more and more places, more and more agencies were on board with the concept of the triad, that it wasn't everybody step back and have a seat and watch the negotiators. It was that, and this was one of our initial policies at San Francisco. They made clear is that we're part of this team, this critical incident management team, and you got command, you got tactical, and you got negotiations.
Right.
And it was inculcated in us pretty early on that we had a team role to keep to be aware that command was making ultimate decisions. We needed to keep tactical advised. Hopefully we'd get advice and information, intel from tactical, and we'd work together to resolve these incidents. And the more you saw that, it was more like, okay, yeah, this is the way we should be operating. Right. They did this, they did that. There were a few things, if you want to talk about later, that were advocated. I forgot to mention, I guess, when the SFPD started doing the state certified courses, Jerry Doan, who was the sergeant involved, would bring out Harvey Schlossberg from NYPD. So by the time we were doing the first state certified courses for open to any law enforcement, Harvey Schlossberg was the primary instructor. And instead of 24 hours or so of abnormal psychology, you got 24 hours of Harvey Schlossberg. Sort of, in a way, you could say, telling war stories. But he was really good, and he would promise, and he held to the promise. He would say, I'm going to talk about a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'll jump around, but by the time I get to the third day, I'll cover everything that I think you ought to know. And so we would hear from their experiences, right, as things that didn't work. Drugging suspects. That was one of the things they tried. Was they, let's, they want some beer, we'll send in some beer with some sedative. Well, then they had a few hostages drink the beer and pass out.
Right.
Found that wasn't so good. Right. They were also very, very big on, understandably, on opposing third parties. So often
Mm-hmm.
There's an incident and somebody shows up and says, "Oh, that's my brother in there, and I can talk to him, and I'll make him give up, and I'll do this." And they had a few incidents in which they used third parties that didn't go well. They would turn on NYPD, and it's like, "Hey, man, don't give in, hang in there," that kind of stuff. And so they were very opposed to TPIs, and that was one of the kinds of things that we learned. Little things like that they had tried or experimented with, and didn't always go well. But they had such a volume of cases.
Yeah,
I mean, they were going multiple times, it seems, a week.
Right.
As they had incidents to respond to. So it's a lot to learn, but it was a lot of times from NYPD.
Right. So one of the important things I think about when we talk about negotiations is the small knit community. But we did a good job even back in the day of sharing information. Can you maybe talk about? I know we actually just had Bob on one of the programs, but your relationship with like Bob Beach and the Tony Hares and and the Harveys, how that helped you guys develop what negotiations is today by creating those bonds and learning from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that was different about negotiations, it seemed to me, I mean, without, I wasn't a bomb guy, wasn't a tactical guy, and I don't know what they were doing. Didn't seem like there was that much, but like I say, this process started to grow in a popularity of having debriefs where, training would be scheduled and there'd be one or two agencies that would be there to talk about the incident they had, the context, the background, what they did, what seemed to work, what didn't seem to work. A lot of times it wasn't so much errors, it was difficulty sometimes establishing relationship. ALS, active listening skills, were certainly around, but really not really addressed or accepted or utilized very much anywhere until almost until the latter part of the 80s at the earliest. But so, like I say, it was learning. Again, that was my approach and my perspective is that, it doesn't seem like we're having as much experience as a place like NYPD. So let's pay attention to what happens in other places.
Right. So what, if you had to say, skill wise, what do you think are some important skills a negotiator needs to have, and how can you sharpen some of those skills?
Well, I think one of the over the years, one of the sort of skills and abilities that it seems like the best negotiators have is certainly a fair degree of patience, being open-minded, being being willing to pay attention, but just a level of maturity and experience and exposure to all the various types of personalities that exist that we probably see a little more of, maybe a lot more of in law enforcement, but that are out there, so that you got a negotiator who isn't going to get hung up on the way somebody looks or the interests that they're involved in or their lifestyle or whatever, but are in a barricade, a standoff situation, being willing to talk to them, certainly being willing to accept a certain amount of abuse. There's those cases now and then where the subject involved is confrontational and verbally abusive and cusses you out and is certainly very agitated and upset. So people who are able to listen and to learn the lessons of the experience of others in the same situation and take those to heart, use those. Those are the kind of people. The problem is it's kind of hard to test for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the screening that I've been involved with at San Francisco and in Sonoma County, you really kind of have to give them a scenario to try to talk with and kind of see what their approach is, what their level of comfort is in talking to somebody who's a stranger, somebody they never talked to before and is agitated, upset, and abusive.
Mm-hmm.
Which is one of the reasons I think that those kind of scenarios, those kind of exercises are so useful once a person has become a negotiator, to participate in that kind of training and see what their ability is to and skill level basically is with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have empathy to establish a relationship with somebody, and so you had one of the sort of training steps is getting folks to understand, we're not there to become friends with this person. When I say relationship, we're talking about the interaction that's going to go on during the incident. And that's what we're talking about. So that's the extent of the relationship. But sometimes you got to have some real empathy. You got to have empathy in some situations that are, again, these people will get into situations sometimes of their own making that are very dramatic. They've committed violence, sometimes extreme violence. They're now boxed into a situation where this is a standoff. We can't go in and get them. They're reluctant to come out, and being able to convey a willingness to listen, to convey where we can the empathy and empathy for their situation,
mm-hmm.
and articulating that to them. It became more and more apparent was really key. That with active listening skills, as we became accustomed to using those more, being able to do emotion labeling and things of that type to, get this person to understand that we were hearing them and we were recognizing, or at least trying to recognize the impact it had on them, was tremendously powerful. And we found very often we were dealing with people who had no friends or family
mm-hmm.
They truly had a good bond with, nobody that would ever have any interest in listening to them, who had no concern for what their problems were or what life was for them. And so being introduced into a situation with a person like that and being someone who is willing to listen and convey that we were listening and hearing, like I say, it turned out we could see almost, I don't want to say miraculous, but really amazing positive results, because now this person had somebody where we had incidents starting from the very beginning where the subject wanted to meet and have contact and more interaction with the primary negotiator, because this was something that actually someone who
actually listened to them
really cared.
Right. So unfortunately, I know throughout my career that we've come across some people that, there's a little resistance and whatnot. I can imagine even back in the 70s, how much more that was. So why do you think people had that resistance, and what were some things you guys did to kind of, hit that head on and try and, educate people on what this new thing is, this negotiation stuff?
Yeah, well, let's face it, law enforcement historically, to a certain degree, still is a male-dominated, macho kind of type of work. There's this warrior concept. It's valid for several reasons. But sometimes you get people who are so hung up on the warrior aspect that they're chomping at the bit to be in confrontation. I think back then there were a lot more individuals who were in SWAT because they knew that this was going to be the real physically challenging and hazardous types of confrontations.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept, back in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s of, wait a minute, we're not going to go in and get these people. We're going to stop and we're going to talk to them. And that was really very revolutionary. And but what ended up happening, I mean, that a lot of the credit, the major part of the credit goes to NYPD, was the fact they had so many of these incidents, and the record proved itself. They had incident after incident. There would be confrontations between officers. There'd be shots fired, officers down, ended up with negotiations, and the incidents would be resolved without anybody else. I think that was one of the things that appealed more and more over the years to SWAT people, especially the more astute and mature SWAT people, and including team leaders, was, hey, if I don't have to go into a situation that's going to expose my guys,
right,
because they were mostly all guys, to hazard, to getting injured or killed, all the better. If you guys can talk them out and I don't have to do that, if we got to do it, we're going to do it. We train to do it. We're going to try to be the best we can at that. But if you can get these people out without having to take that risk. Any SWAT team leader who's had the experience of losing a SWAT officer,
right,
they're the biggest fans of negotiations, because you don't want to have that happen. And as time goes on, if you watch these incidents, you listen to what takes place, you find out how easily things can go sideways. And what seemed to be pretty simple, cut and dried plans, so I go by the wayside. Injuries that take place, weapons that are present we weren't aware of. Somebody, there's an easy, quick example I can think of. I know there's a case up in Northern California years ago where there was a barricade. They went into the room, and as soon as they opened the door of the apartment, is what it was, they saw the back of a sofa that had been pushed up. It wasn't against the door, but it was right there. So before they could proceed in, they had this obstacle to get over, and that slowed things down enough. That was, I believe, the subject was shot, which was not really their intent. They had the ability. They could have taken the subject alive, but nobody knew. There wasn't the opportunity to get that intel. Big surprise, last minute. And,
right.
Those kinds of things happen, and unfortunately still happen today.
Right.
So, like I say, it was basically, going, we're not going to do this, kissy, huggy, kumbaya kind of stuff. And,
right.
and then basically that, for the most part, there was a common perception among SWAT officers, tactical officers. The commander types began to come on board more readily, partly because they were higher level in the agency. This was the policy of the agency. They were more attuned and aware that they needed to follow policy and follow the desires of command. And then gradually, as time went on, it kind of disappeared, or became much more reduced.
Right.
And which ended up making collaboration a lot easier, a lot better, up until first 10, 15 years or more negotiations. The negotiators would train among themselves, and SWAT people would train among themselves. And it was almost like, well, we don't talk to those people.
Right.
And as time went on and the advantages of collaboration became more apparent, and we're still trying to encourage agencies. It's not so much that there's antipathy between the SWAT negotiators. It's just that they're so focused on their own skills training on their own skills and whatnot, that they forget to do joint trainings. And so, I mean, that's the way it was in San Francisco up until a few years before I left. We really had to push. You got to do a joint training. You got to do joint trainings where scenarios involve both negotiations and tactical.
Looking back on your career, is there maybe one or two incidents that kind of stood out that kind of you still every now and then might kind of pop in your head, or something you think about here and there?
Yeah, not a lot at SF.
Mm-hmm.
In San Francisco, certainly, the program got started after that initial course that I told you about, when one of the lieutenants, there's a guy named Richard Clapp.
Mm-hmm.
He and another lieutenant had been in the training. This other lieutenant, located in another district, had a domestic confrontation incident go down where shots were fired at officers. He called up Clapp and said, "Hey, you went through this training. Why don't you come see if you can negotiate?" The short version of it is that within 2.5 hours, Dick had gotten the suspect to surrender, armed suspect to surrender. And as a result, he strongly advocated and became the primary advocate of negotiations at San Francisco. The program got up and running at the urging of Sergeant Jerry Doan. Dick Clapp basically was the show pony of it. He would do training. He would do presentations here and there, not a lot, but a few around, and talk about his personal experience. And so that's how it first got started. And then within a few months after we were formed, we had a botched supermarket robbery go down in the central part of San Francisco, a place called Petrini Plaza. And that involved a couple of bozos taking supermarket staff, about 9 of them, hostage to get into the office, get into the safe, get the proceeds, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the meantime, because they botched things, SF was notified, officers responded. They could see officers were outside. They gathered these people up in an office, and there became a standoff starting about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. They went into mid-afternoon, and Clapp was the primary negotiator. We were all trying to figure out at that point was, what do we do besides stand around and listen here? Right. And so we developed the concept of a coach, a concept of recording negotiations, intelligence gathering, liaison with command, those kinds of things we sort of learned as we went. And so that incident was really the first major incident that got us started. I was there. I wasn't, I was one of the stand around and watch, figure out what you can do to help kind of things. Yeah. And, but obviously that is real strong in my mind. Then we had another incident a few years later in 1979. It was very, very bizarre. We had a guy who had some mental health issues. In retrospect, we knew. And again, we hadn't had that many incidents, hadn't been confronted by that kind of thing. Anyhow, this guy went into a high-rise building in the center part of San Francisco on Market Street. Market Street's the main. It's not really, it's sort of southeast, northwest directional main street boulevard in San Francisco, along which there's a lot of business, corporate buildings, things like that. And it's adjacent to Civic Center. Well, this guy, at about 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, walks into this building, which is pretty much, I wouldn't say empty, but there's not a whole lot of people there on a Friday afternoon. It's getaway day, Yeah. But he goes inside. He goes up to about the 30th floor. He finds some poor woman who is a secretary in one of the offices and takes her hostage. Now, this guy had been reported as being on scene and acting strangely. The building security went up to look for him. They saw him. By that time, he had produced a rifle from a bag that he had been carrying, and points it at the security officers, who return fire and blow out a glass window, glass door, glass wall, basically. And so the incident's on. So San Francisco's call, we all go out there. My team leader was on vacation back in Michigan, and I was the unofficial assistant, so I became the de facto team leader. And it was very challenging. The guy claimed he was a member of a revolutionary group called the SLAWOO, which of course meant absolutely nothing to us. Although at the time, the Symbionese Liberation Army had been active in San Francisco. So we know what SLA was. Okay, so he's claiming he's part of this group. And the WO, well, what's this WO? Well, that's called the War on Oppression. Okay, so he's got partners that are in other locations around town. He's got explosives. They got explosives. They're going to start a revolution in order to accomplish their goals, which were very difficult to obtain from him. Although, again, this was pre-ALS, and it was tough. We had he ran one of our new negotiators, almost ragged, trying to communicate with him, trying to get information from him, trying to establish a relationship. Mm-hmm. And that went on from about 4 p.m. until about 4 o'clock in the following morning, when it turned out, after several hours, a lot of effort by that negotiator, a lot of effort from one of the women negotiators we had brought on, who got stuck after being there for quite some time. We came up with a bright idea. Maybe we could try having a woman talk to this guy and take a certain position, certain posture in talking to him. She made a lot of effort to do that. This guy was just, certainly for the time, was just unreachable. So ultimately, the SWAT team, the tactical team, made entry, went in and got him, saved the hostage. One of our first lessons, they were in a corner office. I omitted a lot here, including that he broke out a window on the 30-some-odd floor of this building, and he was firing shots with his M1 carbine all over the area that he could see, including City Hall, the City Library, the Civic Center. So, we had to clear massive areas of the city, that part of the city. Because of the broken glass outside the door of this office, because the door was closed, the hostage and hostage taker inside, and he had fallen asleep. That was what we were pretty sure was taking place from his demeanor and so forth. It sounded like he was getting sleepy. And they were pretty sure he was asleep. In fact, he was asleep. But what happened was the hostage, about a 35, 40-year-old woman, mainstream, ordinary, poor gal, she's inside, but she hears the officers stepping on the glass outside.
Oh, no.
And she went to try to wake him up.
Oh, jeez.
So, Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
Okay, we got Stockholm Syndrome in a big way. Well, fortunately, they had moved efficiently and quickly enough. They got inside, captured him, rescued her. But again, there was one with big guns. But anyhow, and as it turned out, he was taken into custody. He was charged with a hostage taking. 4 days later, while in custody of the sheriff's office in jail, he hanged himself, which most cops, a lot of people could say, okay, end of that problem.
Yeah.
It's simple. And so, but of course, it deprived us of the opportunity to ever talk to this guy and try and find out more about him. He had a spotty criminal record. He was from Rhode Island, made his way across the country. Strangely enough, he ended up living and hanging out in Berkeley, where, had the national reputation, if not international, for the location of radicals. Call it the People's Republic of Berkeley. And got a little trouble there, here and there. But the other thing we learned was we had about 20 negotiators. We had just brought in a whole new batch in 1978, and we had a lot of negotiators on the scene. Many, if not most of which, were involved in intel gathering. They were making phone calls, doing record checks, doing interviews, and they kept pretty busy gathering that information to find out what little we could about this guy. We had him identified, saw his record, but it didn't tell us a whole lot. It was just like he came up with this wacko idea about being a revolutionary, and we were the lucky recipients of that.
Right.
Yeah, that was one that stood out. And then there was we had an incident several years later that where a parole officer was doing a check on one of his parolees about some robberies. Guy had a gun in his apartment. Got the drop on the parole officer. He was held hostage for 4 or 5 hours. And, our negotiating team negotiated that surrender. But what was the big standout in my mind, we had the original deputy chief who had authorized the okay for us to proceed and establish the team in 1974. And this was 80, 82, somewhere in there. He was at that point the deputy chief of patrol. And so he comes to the knock and, comes on in. He's by himself. He doesn't bring an entourage. But he comes in and he says, well, I just want to see what's going on. He has a seat and he watches and listens. And when it was over, he said, well, you guys really know what you're doing. I'm very impressed with how you guys operate. Wow. Okay. Yeah. That was the ultimate home run. Yeah. And we got the complete support from them. The only other thing I want to add is that a lot of the lessons or the cases that stick out in my mind happen elsewhere. And like I say, I became a strong, did a lot of this throughout my subsequent life, was disseminating the information that seemed to be important that negotiators should know that they probably didn't know about. I got to go to the FBI course in 1984. And while I was back there, I found out about the Rochester incident in 1981. A guy named William Griffin kills his mother, et cetera, goes in, takes hostage in the bank, and then ultimately demands that he be killed by the cops. And to back that up, he does what became known as the first case of a hostage killed on deadline, killed one of the employees. Well, obviously, to me, it was like, wow, that's a hit upside the head with a baseball bat. And I had the two FBI agents who were involved in that, and others come out to San Francisco. They were making training tour, so to speak, around the country. And when I found out they were coming to in this SF Bay area, got them scheduled. And they did a presentation, opened up to negotiators and whoever from law enforcement around the Bay Area, came to SFPD, hear about this incident and so forth. And so that was a watershed incident in my mind. And unfortunately, there have been a few others, some tragic, some not. But like I say, that's pretty much kind of was the theme for the rest of my life was, pay attention to what's going on in other places, make sure it's known. When I got involved in Con, I had the opportunity to bring a lot of these folks to California to present for our conference.
All right, we're going to take a real quick break here at the Crisis Cop podcast. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Thought about a career in voiceover? Need a great, cost-effective on-hold message for your organization or business? Don't know where to start? Check out The Voice Farm, your one-stop shop for voiceover needs. Check it out now by accessing The Voice Farm at voicefarmers.com and see what difference can be made with a company that is truly outside the box. From the Voice Box, voicefarmers.com. That's voicefarmers.com.
Wouldn't it be cool if your advertising could last forever? It can with perpetual advertising. Here's how it works. Unlike TV or radio ads, where every instance the ads are broadcast, they're only played once and lost forever. Perpetual advertising can have repeat exposure and replayability weeks, months, and even years after they're inserted in a podcast. So even if a podcast is a few years old, your ads will still be impactful to repeat listeners, as well as new listeners. This gives your advertising dollar the most bang for the buck. Find out more about perpetual advertising at twoguystalking.com/sponsors.
Have you got a cool voice? Do you like to act? Are you quick when it comes to thinking on your feet? Want to help propel the future of training crisis negotiators across the globe and foster the future of law enforcement? We need you. It doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter where you're from. Doesn't matter what's on your plate. We want your voice to help us evolve the way that law enforcement interacts and succeeds when it comes to crisis negotiation. Ready to get started? Access BlueBaggersProject.com and start your role-playing voice adventure today. BlueBaggersProject.com. That's BlueBaggersProject.com.
And we're back from break, and joining us today is Bill Kidd. He is one of the founding members of the San Francisco Police Hostage Negotiation Team. So, Bill, we were talking a little bit about the stress levels, and this job negotiation sometimes puts a lot of stress on you, and just the after effects of that. How did you cope with that, and how did you deal with some of those situations throughout your career?
Well, I guess we never had any real tragic incidents. I personally, had a pretty a very good career over the years where I wasn't exposed to a lot of blood and gore, death. I've been around dead bodies and things like that. But I just know a lot of other officers, colleagues, deputies who were exposed to things that were a lot more traumatic than I've been. So basically, it's been sort of vicarious, a certain amount of vicarious aspect to it. And I guess, if not demonstrating it, at least practicing a lot of empathy, because like I say, I've dealt with, been exposed to, I've studied a lot of real tragic cases, both for law enforcement people and for civilians. It's been sort of, I wouldn't say osmosis, but it's been a very gradual process over the years where, like I say, at this point, I've seen and I've closely examined so much of it. It kind of ruins any kind of drama, entertainment, aspects for me. But, now part of that, in answer to management, probably one of the, not probably, but definitely one of the pluses that we've had over the years, at least specifically in California, was that we've had these behavioral science folks, mostly PhD or marriage family counselors, therapists of that type and so forth, that have engaged with negotiating teams, become involved in negotiating teams, going back several decades to an era when, in fact, there were uses made of these folks that turned out to be a big mistake. But as time went on, they became more focused on providing psychological, emotional support for negotiators. The concept of debriefings, of briefing a participant on teams after an incident, especially if there was any negative outcome, hostage killed, seriously wounded. Certainly when officers have been injured or killed. And again, as I said, in San Francisco, we haven't had that related to hostage taking or negotiation incidents, but other agencies have. So we had people. There's a guy down in Arizona, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin, wrote a book on survival and law enforcement. Very emotional, very great emotional support. We had him present at Con. And there's been a few others in California that have presented 2 or 3 times on the issue of stress management. The need to have ways to kind of diffuse after some incidents, or as a matter of routine in most incidents. And so the psychological and emotional support has really been pretty good. Now, obviously, every personality processes that differently.
Right.
I know of negotiators who have, in some cases, left negotiation. Some left law enforcement altogether because of not necessarily negotiation events, but events that were very traumatic and took a toll on them sufficient to the point that where they said, don't want to do this anymore. And so, like I say, now at the same time, I gotta say, I'm not here to say, well, I've managed all my stress.
Right.
I think a lot of that is still yet to be seen. It takes a toll on you a lot of times in terms of your relationship with family and things like that aren't necessarily real dramatic,
right?
But can get to you. And I've been in therapy a couple of different times, including marital therapy, and that's kind of how you kind of have to go. And from my perspective, it's, you got to talk to people, who can help you with those kinds of emotions.
Right, absolutely. So, what kind of advice would you give a new negotiator? Maybe somebody's getting ready to apply for a negotiation team, or they're kind of looking at maybe they want to become a negotiator. What would be some advice you could give them?
Well, I thought a lot about this. Again, this relates to the issue of selection, qualities you're looking for, and sort of the personality and style of the individual that they bring to the selection process and then subsequently the team. It's hard to say, okay, well, you need to go out and you got to deal with a lot of different people. You got to understand a lot of different backgrounds, experiences, what it's like for people whose life is a complete mystery to you. You don't know what it's like living for them. A lot of experience and maturity. Well, you just can't say, go get this, but certainly those that have it, oftentimes, or I would think for the most part, you can pick up on that pretty quickly. We like I say, all these selection processes that I'm aware of now, include sort of a test scenario. This is a situation, this is who you're dealing with, and this is what the situation is. So go ahead and engage them. And you can kind of pick up on the grossest abilities or lack thereof. If they're comfortable talking to people, you're going to pick up on that. If they're not comfortable talking to people, you can pick up on that. I wouldn't say that it's a quick and easy way to get a real fine assessment, but you get an idea. And then kind of looking at the person's work history. In San Francisco, we had applicants at least in one or a couple of sessions that would give us the okay to look at their personnel file, look at their complaint file, complaint history, or any history with internal affairs, we got to look at. And I think it served us well. First of all, well, if there were a lot of officers who really weren't happy with that, we never heard from them.
Right.
But we had 50, 60 plus applicants who all said, sure, I'll sign off. Let me go ahead and take a look. And some which had minor disciplinary action. But like I say, I think that's a clue right there. It's like, hey, they either felt that they were misjudged, or they, there were reasons why they did what they did. They realized they might not do it differently if they had the opportunity. But they're, they're good with it. That level of maturity in law enforcement that, you realize you don't have all the answers. You got to be flexible. You got to be open and listening to what people are telling you. And, it's important to exercise good judgment. And, that's kind of what you're looking for. Now, other than that, I don't know what else there is except to say, hey, here are about four or five books it would be good for you to read. You get a better overall idea what it's all about,
right?
What the training is, what the concepts are. And that, of course, includes the Mullins and McMain's Crisis Negotiations for Law Enforcement, Managing Crisis Incidents for Negotiations for Law Enforcement and Corrections, Nesner's book, Stalling for Time, book called Saving Lives. I'm not sure I know it hasn't got as widespread attention as Gary's book, but it's a guy named Mitch Hammer. Mitch Hammer was a communications professor out of American University. Wrote a great book called Saving Lives on negotiations and some very sophisticated assessments of techniques and so forth. Another book would not, been around a long time, and I don't think many people know about it. It's called The On-Scene Guide for Crisis Negotiators, written by an agent named Fred Lansley, who was at one of the earlier agents at the crisis negotiation at Quantico. Mm-hmm. And he was the guy running the 2-week course when I went through it in 1984, Fred Lansley. It's not realistically, it wouldn't be a book you'd want to have there or be going through during an incident.
Right.
But it gives a lot of great background. It also gives a great appendix overview of the incident at Ruby Ridge, where negotiations was essentially opposed and fought off tooth and nail until it became obvious there was no way to resolve it without negotiation. And then lastly, I would say Into the Chaos. You're probably familiar with Deborah McMahon's book, Into the Chaos, edited. But, so you got some idea what it's about, how it works and so forth. But there's certain skills, you're either able and willing to talk to people or you aren't. You're either able to empathize with people or you aren't. And I've pushed that harder and harder as time has gone on, where I've told classes that I still do that, you got to be able to exercise empathy. If empathy isn't your thing, if you don't buy into it, maybe this isn't your thing. Maybe you need to do something else, because it's times it's got to be there and it's got to be genuine.
Right. You can't fake empathy. And that's one of the things you can't really teach how to be empathetic either. You almost have to have that natural ability, and then kind of make sure that you're really empathetic.
Yeah. So to answer your question, it's been a tough question, because there's a lot of folks, cops and deputies I've met, from what I know about them, sound like they'd be good negotiators. I like to say, okay, do 1, 2, 3, and you'll be perfectly prepared.
Right.
But, I really can't, other than, like I say, suggest those books. I hope that they've got it in them to convey that for their best case. Not to say that if they're not really good at empathy or patience and so forth, that it's going to be forthcoming and that they would be eliminated. There are individuals that certainly get past that,
right,
because of their performance on the spot and so forth. Doesn't mean that they're not good. I mean, I know a lot of negotiators who who that part of it really wasn't their forte. What their forte was intelligence gathering,
Right.
collaboration, working in liaison with tactical, and so they're perfectly capable, competent, contributing members of the team, even though they would try to avoid being a primary.
Yeah.
Any way they could.
So looking back on your career, was there any incidents that you can think of, maybe looking back at it now, that maybe were a little bit comical or humorous, that maybe you didn't think about it and like, oh, you know what, that actually was kind of a little funny when now that it happened?
Frank, I laugh. Hopefully, glad I can still laugh. Not in our experience, and I don't really know many of. Like I say, I pay attention to incidents of a lot of other agents anywhere around the country at a minimum. But cops and deputies like I do, and unfortunately, so many of us get by, and this applies to me as well, because you got a sense of humor. You got to have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
So there have been incidents like that. The only thing I can think of is that. And there's no, well, let me just tell what happened. I can't identify the department, but there was a barricade with an individual that was going on for several hours. A family member had been identified and contacted, and advised the agency's team that this person was into infantilism. And so they were very much into baby clothes, or adult-sized baby clothes. And so they got to the point where this guy agreed to come out. He came out, unarmed, wearing nothing but a large diaper.
Oh, boy.
And the SWAT team members found it difficulty maintaining their control.
Yeah, I could understand that.
He was taken to custody with no problem.
Right.
But that's the only incident I know that I would say was funny. Now I know, many people I work, a colleague of mine, probably the most standout incident that I can count. We were working in a kind of a high stress, high volume investigative unit, and he was we had a daily routine where certain we call them inspectors. Inspector would be on call for the day to take any walk-ins that came in, and those were predominantly misdemeanor cases of, were very unlikely to be prosecuted, vandalisms, simple batteries, things like that. But we get a lot of those, and it'd be high stressful. Finally, this guy, at one point in the middle of the afternoon, he slams his fist on his desk and he yells out, "That's it! I can't take it anymore. I'm ripping off my clothes. I'm wrapping myself in saran wrap, and I'm going up to the chief's office." and we had the office had about 20 plus or minus inspectors in it. And initially he starts off and they're thinking, "Uh-oh, this guy's going off. What's happening?" Well, by the time he got to the end, people are just rolling on the floor. But this guy got one of the best sense of humor that I've come across. But like I say, that goes a long way. Happen to deal with the kind of incidents we deal with, and other things in law enforcement. Got to have a sense of humor, and it's really a big positive.
Yeah. So not too long ago, I saw that you guys had a reunion of negotiators for San Francisco. So, and I saw you were involved in it. So tell me a little bit about that, and kind of, if you know what brought that about, or.
Well, it was frankly the team runs, let me say that by 1977, 78, we were down to like 12 negotiators on the team. That's just the city of San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's not a small suburb or whatever.
Right.
And so there would be occasions when there'd be an event and they call for negotiators, and we had no on call. It was pretty much, the event goes down, we put out the call and hope we get people. And that would happen. People would be on vacation, on disability, and it was getting difficult. So after that, we beefed up to over 30. And the team has been pretty much 30 plus
Mhm.
ever since. So there's a fair number of people. And in the last couple of years, the leadership in particular, a few others have said, we're looking at about 50 years since the team was established.
Right.
We ought to do something to recognize that. And ultimately, what it came down to was they had a event. This is about the only way to describe it, I guess. We have a new headquarters building. It's been around about 10, 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lobby, large lobby, and off of that, I have a large multi-purpose room. And they invited, I assisted them as best I could in helping to identify all of the prior folks who had not only been negotiators and on the team, but had retired.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, in that process, I tracked we had 15 of the negotiators we had over the years from since 1974 die,
Mm-hmm.
had passed on, all from natural causes, but nonetheless no longer with us. But we came up with a pretty good sized list, tried to get the contact information for anybody we could, and they put out emails let people know this was going to be happening. It was basically, this is where it's going to be. We're just going to have a recognition. Ultimately, that turned into an arrangement where they had a buffet, and then basically it was all kind of meet and greet. Those of us in the past get together. A lot of us hadn't seen each other in many years,
Mm-hmm.
so that was enjoyable for us. A lot of the new negotiators, current or recent negotiators, would come. In some cases, a lot of them knew who we were and heard about us and so forth, but never met us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would meet them. And then there was a short ceremony where out in the lobby where the chief addressed everybody, expressed his gratitude for the work that the team had done since 1974, and in a few comments from the guy, primary captain who had organized it, and so it was very nice.
Yeah.
And we had created some challenge coins commemorating the 50th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody was a negotiator was there. This is about a dozen or more, I guess, folks who weren't actually on the team, but were close to or friends or partners of negotiators that came as well. But all the negotiators got a challenge coin and commemorative challenge coin. So it was a very nice event. Photos taken, and we don't really have a website, but there's a photo of everybody who was there, past and current, and then another photo separately of the retirees.
And I just from my experience, I think that's something I don't think we really did that great a job of, is remembering the people from the past. I mean, I think it was really great you guys did that. But I'll go around the country and I'll ask a lot of students, hey, do you know who created your team? And a lot of them have no idea how their team got started, who was on the first team. And that just goes back to this legacy, right? We want to have.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's the history thing, you know. Most of us are not interested in history until we get to the point where we've been around long enough that we have one,
right?
Where we've been involved with one, and that was certainly my case. I'm a big fan of history, military history, American history, and etc. That really came on about 20 years ago, and because I was a lousy history student when I was in college, but you learn, and then hopefully. So to me, the plus was I wanted to, and I've written. I wrote an article for the Police Association paper about 15 years ago, where I explained how the concept got started in San Francisco. And again, it was Jerry Doan brought the idea, helped with initial courses, and then the courses went when they left San Francisco after about the first 4. They were taken in, sponsored by San Jose State University, their administrative justice program, and they ran basic negotiation courses and then later advanced courses for years and years, right up until the about 2010 or so. And then in the meantime, of course, FBI started doing courses out of field offices around the country. A few other sources. There's a private entity of active and former law enforcement out of Sacramento County that run training of various types, including negotiations. So there's those courses as well. But I want them to understand who Jerry Doan was,
right?
Who Dick Clapp was, the role that they played, and how things got started. Because, as I said, I haven't found another place that had a team established right after NYPD than us.
Right.
That's how this course has started. And to my knowledge, I don't think there were any basic negotiation courses being run anywhere else except out of California until they started to catch up. Northwest, I think it's called Northwest Traffic Institute or something.
Yeah.
Been around for decades and decades. They started doing the courses. The Canadians got involved. They were doing courses. But it was quite a while before that started until Bob Beach, Fairfax County.
Yeah.
They established a basic course and it trained hundreds and hundreds of officers at a minimum up and down the East Coast. FBI courses trained hundreds. And so, but that's how the ball got started to roll. And, I thought it was important for people to understand, like you say, that legacy that they're part of.
Since we're talking about legacy, what legacy would you like to leave the negotiation community, and what can you bring to future negotiators?
Well, to me, that it basically has come down to the fact that, you get older and you start thinking about what have you accomplished in your life. It's crisis negotiations has been it. We never had, and still don't in San Francisco, a full-time negotiator or negotiating team. But my interest in it and my enthusiasm and advocacy caught on in the late 70s. And I've been involved in negotiator training ever since, up through and continuing today. I still do. I'm one of the instructors in a 3-day course that we do for the state called Domestic Violence for Crisis Negotiators. We've trained over 1,000 negotiators in that course. We've been running since 2000. Spent a few years in the 90s creating the course, testing it, amending it, and then it's been up and running ever since. It's still going. In fact, later this month, we do the second of our 2 annual courses this year in Santa Ana. And but to me, I mean, like I say, I think that the more involved, or once you get involved in negotiations, you realize, and I know you've had this experience, that what we do may not be exciting as a tactical rescue operation, but what we do is we keep people alive that might not survive otherwise.
Right.
And that includes not just civilians, but includes law enforcement. So to me, my legacy is having been involved and doing what I've done. It wasn't like any kind of a grand plan or anything like that. But, Gary Nesser has been known to have said that crisis negotiation was the greatest advancement in law enforcement in the 20th century. I think there's a lot to that. And when we think back as to how incidents like this were handled before,
right,
and how bad some incidents can get, forced almost without exception by the perpetrator involved, who forces law enforcement to have to use tactical operations, deadly force, in order to do the best they can to try to save innocent parties. we've saved hundreds of lives. And to me, that I've had a role in training. And we haven't talked about, one of the things I did, I was able to do more with Con was I would be going to conferences elsewhere around the country. I'd meet other negotiators. I would be able to spread information and information about incidents and presenters to them that they could expose their negotiators to. So to me, it's been a lot of aspects to this that has become work that I think I'm very proud of, and that's basically my legacy is the role that I play, that I continue to play in trying to train negotiators to do the work. And of course, in the meantime, you see various types of law enforcement skills include things like active listening skills or training to downshift incidents to avoid using force if at all possible. And, one of the changes that I saw take place over the years was, or initially it was like, the cops knew, two approaches: do nothing or go in and get the guy.
Right.
And we gradually saw patrol officers start to get involved in taking the initiative to make contact, to communicate, some of which resulted in quick resolutions. Others didn't, they needed more assistance from negotiators. But that was a skill that was basically unheard of. And frankly, like I say, when I first started, would have been scoffed at.
Right.
By your basic street cop. I said, you're going to be kidding me. That's, we don't do that.
Come on, why are we talking to these people, right?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously that became very tough when you're talking. And I know a number of cases where negotiators I knew, or with teams that I knew that were with teams I didn't know, but would have incidents where they have 2, 3, 4 officers killed in a confrontation, in an incident. But a team nonetheless responds, begin operations, negotiate an individual to surrender. And, today we got folks who say that's ridiculous. Why would we do that when this is a person we ought to assault this kid? Well, the reason is
right.
A lot of times you can't do that.
Right.
You can do that, but you're basically saying, okay, well, of the 6 guys we have here doing this entry, 1 or 2 of you may not make it.
Right,
okay?
right.
Because they have a tactical advantage.
Right.
And at the same token, it means that a lot of teams have had to put up with, we were talking about incidents that stay with me. We had an incident in this town across the bay in San Francisco in 1993 where barricaded estranged husband had 2 of his kids, wasn't handled well for a lot of reasons by the agency or the negotiators. And he ended up killing 2 kids and killing himself. And it goes down in a way where, the officers there are the victims of this killing. They're witnesses to these killings.
Yeah.
Hands are tied and just have no option to be able to prevent that. And like I say, being able to minimize that, prevent that, has been very important to me. And I've had the privilege of devoting a lot of time, energy, and enthusiasm to spreading the word that and advocating that and enabling other cops and deputies to do the best they can as negotiators in these types of incidents. And recuperate when they're not they don't go well.
Right. Yeah. So important. Well, Bill, thank you for your time, sharing your experience and your knowledge. And I can say, just from my standpoint, just having you still active in the field, doing what you do has been beneficial for all of us out there. And we can always learn more from the guys that were there, kind of in the 70s where it all started. So I just want to thank you, and we'll see you next episode on the Crisis Cop Podcast Network.
Appreciate it.